So today we are going to look into the first Chimurenga. It's both a history and a heritage lesson. So they say they call it the first Chimurenga or the Ndebele Shona uprising, that was from 1896 to 1897. So this was a war fought between the Ndebele and the Shona versus the British. Ukaenda ku-advanced level history pana anonzi DNB anotsanangura achiti Chimurenga kwete Chimurenga, because the whites fought with the Ndebele then with the Shona. Although my grievances or zvichemo or my causes zvakadai tonga zvakafanana ndizvo. So tichabata my causes initially, then after the causes we have to get into the cause. Yes. So apata nasi tukunyanya kurerekera muNdebele state, the war in Ndebele. Then tomorrow tunozoenda course in Mashonaland. Yes. But my causes acho, my grievances acho akadai tonga akafanana. Right. So let us look at the causes. Let us look into the causes in Matebeland, the Ndebele grievances. Like we said, there is a marriage of convenience between the results of the Anglo-Ndebele War and the causes of the first Chimurenga. Because after the Anglo-Ndebele War, they lost their land. So that age of trying to recover the land contributed to this first Chimurenga. So they lost their independence, they lost the cattle, right? And again, I think I once explained about how they were directly and indirectly forced to work in the settler mines and farms, because the whites introduced a taxation system. And taxation system yacho yaida cash, and varungu vacho ndovega vakawaine cash yacho. Yes. So it also forced kunoshanda kumugoti kwawepo. So they were forced to pay a lot of taxes, like hard tax, dog tax, deep tax by the whites. Then hatred of Shona police who treated the Africans. Yes, because varungu vaishandisa dividing rule. Vaitora vamwe mashona then vomaita mapurisa avo. Ende zvinotanga nhasi even tikada kupinda musecond Chimurenga pane vaitonzi vatengesi. Ukatarisa they were traders. Pana vanhu vekuti vakapiwa shuga nemamarula nevarungu votengesa, votaura kuti magandanga ari pakati, vanhu ivo vanga varipo. Ukatsvaka zvimadhara zvazviri kuhondo zviya zvinokuudza kuti vatengesi vanga varipo. So vatengesi havana kutanga nhasi. Kubva mutime yanamutapa state chaiyo pane vanhu vaidya nemaportuguese kuti vashungurudze vamwe vabi avo, vanhu vakadaro varipo. So the justice system, and they don't have morals and stuff, because they can sell a brother for a piece of silver, right? So the justice system also favored the whites, because white always got the benefit of the doubt. So there was oppressive administration, use of shambox, farms, and abuse of African women by the whites. And even the Ndebele were not allowed to choose a new king after the death of Lobengula. And there was the influence of spirit mediums who assured them that they would win the war. Spirit mediums, the natural disasters like winter pest, droughts, and outbreak of locusts, which were attributed to the coming in of the whites. Because white hands presence. So so the Jameson rate failure also contributed. We'll explain further. So Mashonaland, they were more or less the causes. Like the Shona also lost their land. They were forced to pay taxes like hard tax, dog tax, and deep tax to the whites. The Shona were forced to work in settler farms and mines. Loss of cattle to the whites by the Shona. And the system of justice favored the whites, and there was oppressive administration. Abuse of women. Why to like they used to aggravated indecent assault, which included even raping women. Yes. Police brutality, especially during tax collection. Pawaiwe kuzokolekta mataxi pairohwa vanhu vaipinda mudzimba vovhaya zvinoita sei. Then chiefs lost their power, and ill treatment of Shona workers by the whites, and they were given heavy punishments for simple offenses like minor misdemeanors. So loss of independence by the Shona since 1890, and again the Shona used to trade with the Portuguese. So there was the influence of spirit mediums who assured them that they would win the war, and the Shona also faced some disasters like drought, rinderpest, and outbreak of locust. So my religious leaders, it's also very important, especially when you're studying heritage studies, because they are important, they are part and parcel of our history. Zimbabwe is an indigenous religion. Christianity, Islam, that's foreign. It's just originally to the those are what you know, tirikuita zveChristianity tichamoresana nemutupo tichatitsika dzedu dzechivanhu dzatotedzera. Even tikaroorana tikachata pane marooro anoitwa yatinoti lobola indebele inotoitwa pachivanhu. So isusu culturally religion yedu ireligion yechivanhu. So my religious leaders, they are very important. So they blamed the natural disasters in the coming of the whites. They promised that the disasters would disappear if they drove out the whites. That's their point. Disaster is such a pair and whites it cannot peace. And they even promised immunity from bullets to fighters. White hands, my bullet and and they prophesied that the blacks would win the war. But that prophecy manifested in the second Chimurenga. Yes. First Chimurenga takarohwa tinunyeba. Pakanzi nambuya neanda mapfupa angu achamuka akazomukira ku second Chimurenga, and we indeed won the war. So let us look at the course of the Chimurenga and Matebeland, how it was executed, events of the war in Matebeland. So the Ndebele uprising began in March 1896. So they took advantage of the Jameson raid failure, because there was less presence of the whites in the Matebeland area. Pane vakatora advantage kuti pane like the Bishop or the British were fighting with the Boers in South Africa. So vakabva vatora mamwe masoja vakaenda nawo ku South Africa. So mandebele vatoti chance given vanhu vashoma, let us attack. So there wasn't enough police to protect whites in Zimbabwe. And the whites akagurunurwa because most of the whites vaigara mafarms. And you know mafarms here in Bari, farm rinenge riri panapa, the next house iri ku waterfalls, the next house iri ku Budiriro, like farm. So zvavaiita manje vaifamba vachigurunura house by house. Waingosvikirwa uri padheni wopedzerwa ipapapo. So kwekuti uchemo uite sei hakuna. Zvekutoti pekutotanga zvekuti dai vakaramba vakarusunga vakaruma mazino mandebele ipapapo taipedzera mawaidzi zviri smart. So the Ndebele warriors targeted isolated whites on farms, mines, missions, stores, police posts, and traders. Mamma mission inenge iri kana kuti kubocha kupasi kungosvikiwa makutopisiwa imba makutoita sei. So during the first week of the war, about 130 whites had been killed. Those who escaped were surrounded in Bulawayo by the Amabuto. The Ndebele were later on joined by the Shona in June 1896. So the British settlers asked the British government to stop the uprising, but the British government said no. Tatourairwa 130. Yatwa hondo. Anzi there is nothing to loot. Zvatodhakwa kusiri kufa ndekupi. They instead of stopping the war, because vanhu vari kutaura kuti misai hondo, vanhu vari paground. Andiri kuona medzari. Vanhu vari kuona kuti vanhu vafa kuti akumati ngapera panapa. MaBritish akati munonyepa. Then they came in with about 1,000 soldiers to southern Rhodesia. The whites attacked Ndebele Amabuto one by one. So the Ndebele Amabuto withdrew to Matopo Hills, where they were able to defend themselves. So the British constructed lagers or defenders in Bulawayo, Gweru, and Berengwa. Vanga vatovhara kuti pasaitike any movement. They organized mounted patrols to rescue survivors. Then they began to destroy Ndebele grains and any food items, like sabotaging. They blew up caves using dynamites. Caves. Then they brought reinforcements from outside. They got support, like from Joburg, from the KwaZulu-Natal. They got support from Botswana. They got support from South Africa. They began to burn the villages. They used the route which the Ndebele left open to bring reinforcements from South Africa. They fought the Ndebele under the command of Frederick Carrington, and they captured Ndabazika Mambo in July 1896. I think on the way to Blawa, kuna Ndabazinduna, Ndabazika Mambo, my area such a. So the settlers also banned Ndebele crops and roads in Obagas or intermitting with the Ndebele so as to stop the war. Because the roads is operating in the company. A war is costly. Wondo inopedza mari. So here roads wacho aitozoona reside kudai wangatitaura natidzisana. Vanoiti the matopo indaba kuti vakazosangana pamatopo vachitaurana. So during the negotiation with the Ndebele senior Induna, Rhodes used bribery to get the Indunas to negotiate peace. He also wanted peace. Bozi Takati Rhodes, he was the owner of the British South African company, among my shareholders. And the company was bound to broke. Then he had to engage in a war, which would not pay Zamari foot. So, so he promised the Induna jobs in the Bisak, he promised them pensions, and the Indunas were to retain their regional powers. So the Ndebele senior Induna made peace with Rhodes in October 1896 at Matopos, and the war came to an end. Because Rhodes didn't want the war to continue, because he had to further dwindle the Bisak coffers. So military reaction of the white settlers in colonial Zimbabwe and the Ndebele uprising, like how did they react? They constructed lagers in Bulawayo, they organized mounted patrols to rescue survivors and bury the dead. They destroyed the Ndebele grain stores and any food items. They blew up the caves. They brought reinforcements from outside. They burned villages. They used the route left open to South Africa to bring in reinforcements. They fought under the command of Frederick Carrington. They captured Ndabazika Mambo. They both had soldiers on horsebacks, and they also had soldiers on foot, and they sought and solicited assistance from Kama, and they bribed some Shona to fight on their side. So Cecil John Rhodes for the first time was there to attend. I don't know if parade conversation I get as a good. So when Rhodes was there, Dr. Soa was there, V. Stent was there, Johan Cole Brenda was also there. Then the Ndebele leaders were there, Sikombo Nguni and Ngulugulu. So what did they agree? So the Ndebele agreed to suspend fighting the settlers and even raiding them. The Ndebele were not pushovers. Remember when Avaka Bakuna Chaka? Ukona Rhodes in pride yanga ine yakasvika pakuvakumbira kuti vakatoita zvekuti vakazovashandisira like nekuti maybe they were a bit educated but zvehondo chacho izvo because iyo situation inoratidza ndo vakatokumbira, which means Mandebele vangasi vanhu kutamba navo panyaya idzi vaitoda, so Mari County officials were to be punished for their role in the uprising. Like that's what they agreed. I don't know why they came up with such a weird decision. So the Ndebele officials and people who made that or committed other crimes during the uprisings should be tried. And there were not other times actually angry Mandebele. And Ndebele asked guys that guns should be submitted to the settler government. And the Rhodes were supposed to withdraw white forces from Matebeland because we want to ensure peace. Then again, a permanent BISAP would be deployed in Matebeland to replace white forces and maintain peace after the uprising. So no African police, especially the Shona, would work in Matebeland without Ndebele approval. That's what they agreed at the Matopo interview. Because the whites had recruited or had enlisted some blacks, some Shona. So Mandebele Arutai was it. We don't want to see those people. So the settler government would recognize the Ndebele chiefs and headmen, and the Rhodes government would give the Ndebele grain and food, which they like compensation for what they destroyed during the course of the war. So the Indaba also promised that the government would give seeds to the Ndebele in the planting season. Because planting season by the end of the year, Vaifanongo to provide the stuff. So, but we can ask ourselves here, did the Matopo Indaba or the uprising benefit the Ndebele? Yes. The Ndebele benefited. There was a re-establishment of peace in Matebeland. They received grain, food, and planting seeds. Like the settler government recognized the Ndebele chiefs and headmen. They were assured that no Shona police would work in Matebeland without Ndebele approval. But you find out that Matebeland, they lost their freedom because the roads president peace police Matebeland. Zvangofani kutonzwa kuti mapurisa ekusouth Africa azara muZimbabwe tokutotonga neSouth Africa. So they lost a lot of their spears. Some of their leaders were tried, sentenced to death and executed. They lost land to settlers. They were also going to pay taxes. And Nyamanda was not recognized as king of Ndebele, and there was a destruction of traditional institutions, e.g. like the age regiments, right? So it ended up why roads negotiated with the Ndebele and Sanangura. Why roads negotiated? It is because the Ndebele were brave. Imagine kuti vari kurwane utani musewe mainly nevanhu vane pfuti. So roads akatonoti vanhu ava tikada kuita prolong the war tinosara tisina kana cent tinobrokeswa netiwi. So the Ndebele were brave and were known to be good fighters and warlike. So to continue, they had a warlike attitude. Vatori vanhu vaivi kuti zvehondo zvacho vaitozvida. Pane vanhu vekuti munongorwa hondo kavachitya. MaNdebele vanhu vaivi kuti they were fearless. They could say, okay, let's fight. Because vanga vajaira mashona who were a bit passive at that time, yes, whom they could use or what. But the Ndebele, they were quite brave and strong, and they could influence even the bravery to the Shona. So the fighting was costly to the Bisak in terms of money, and the mines and the farms were not working during the uprising, and the Bisak was losing its profits. Yes. So the British government was unwilling to bear the cost of sending troops to crush the uprising. Chazobata futi kusaidi rekumashona rendi futi. Pane zvimwe zvimachifu zvakaoma musoro. Kunana mutasa kunana. Vanga vaine nharo vanhu. Even vana mbuya nehanda nana sekuru kagwi vanga vasiri vanhu vekutamba navo vanhu. They were very dangerous. Mawhite's ndosaka wakaona kuti akatoita zvekutoita kakunyengerera. And again they were growing demands in the British government, parliament, to withdraw the Bisak Charter to rule the territory, and this drove Rhodes to make talks with the Ndebele. The British Parliament, you are fighting, and again, the guerrilla tactics used by the Ndebele were difficult to deal with. Guerrilla warfare, and they would make so they know the area better than you. So the whites were losing both manpower and material support. Yes. So there were some religious leaders who took part in the 1896 war. Umulugulu, Mabeni, Siginyamache, Kwati, Tengela, Chiwa. Why the Ndebele were defeated? Why they were defeated? They had inferior weapons, they had poor strategies, poor communication networks. They were even disunited amongst themselves. Because whenever you engage in a war, fruits of the war. So vamwe vanhu vanotoda kurwa hondo because vanokwada kuti tikazowina hondo iya tichawana chakati nechakati, ende umwe munhu anokuudza kuti ini ndini ndakaplaya role hombe pahondo iyi, So the Ndebele had poor transport. Not all the Ndebele took part in the war, but however the whites had better transport. The whites got external support from South Africa. They had superior weapons like Maxim guns. The whites used a lot of brutality, like kuputitsa kwavaita madynamites kwese-kwese. Nekurohwa kwavaita vanhu vachitsemuka musoro kwakaita kuti MaNdebele ave frightened, and the whites used dynamites. So reasons for blaming the religious leaders for defeat of the Ndebele. We can also blame the religious leaders to some extent, because their prophecy was misleading. They told the people that they were going to win. So that was one of the reasons why people ended up engaging in the war. They suggested poor strategies. They could not give ready solutions to problems. And they even aligned themselves to one group, and their propaganda was misleading. So that's it for today. Tomorrow we are continuing from the course in Mashonaland. I think they need to be done. The course in Mashonaland. Yes. That's when the spirit mediums were also included. So the wall of Chimurenga will be done and dusted tomorrow.